Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church. It's always a delight to hear the Mozart variations on what we lowbrows call Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or Now I Know My ABCs. But what's so really neat about it is just the concept of variation. So many different ways to express the same theme. Variations are played musically, but they illustrate the point that there are many different ways in which we can all make the same point. I'm thinking in particular of one theme called justice and the variety of ways we can play the tune of justice. We can work in the trenches, and there are so many trenches that need our physical labors. We can donate to causes that channel generous funding into paving the road to justice. We can teach our children to be less self-absorbed and the need to level the playing field. We can help get out the vote to elect politicians who are committed to justice. We can pray for justice, walk for justice, protest for justice, and embrace justice in all the different ways that love will allow. Which of the myriad variations appeals to you? Grab hold of it and play it. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. And to help us get through the first hymn this morning, I'm going to ask Lissa and Matthew to work your charms.
You remember that about a month ago we learned this song that's printed in your bulletin, and that was in part in response to a quiz that you failed. An impromptu quiz on Labor Day weekend where Tom was referencing the principles and said, principle number 2, and there was like blank stares, right? So there's an adult version of our principles almost every week on the back of your bulletin, but this is a song that the children of this congregation have been using to learn the principles of Unitarian Universalism for a number of years. And we thought it would be a great way for us to remember them. I know that it's one of the few ways I can actually consistently remember them nowadays. So if you see me on a street corner singing with hand motions, that's probably what I'm doing, just to remind myself. So Lissa is here. She's going to help us with remembering the hand motions. And Rick is going to be playing this fantastic music that you will also recognize from The Sound of Music that goes, do, a deer, a female. Yeah? That sound familiar to you guys? So this song, which is our principles, shortened and abbreviated, goes to that tune, and we're going to sing it through 3 times. Okay? First time, we'll sing it through everybody all together, and Lissa will be doing some hand motions to remind us, because this is also helpful, like not just the words, but like what do we remember with our bodies? Second time, we'll do side to side. So this side, you'll sing 1, each person is important, 2, be kind, right? Back and forth. Balcony, you get to do whatever you want to do. You have ultimate freedom of choice in this, okay? And the third time through, we're going to make it tricky. This side is going to just sing 1, you're going to hold it, 1, and then you sing, each person is important, and then 2, be kind in all you do. You see it? See how that goes? Back and forth? It's going to be... Is that too tricky, or should we just have them hold it? Just numbers. Okay, just numbers, words. All right. You ready? Does it sound like fun? Come on, lie to me. All right, great. Everybody rise and body your spirit and join. 1, each person is important. 2, be kind in all you do. 3, we help each other learn. 4, and search for what is true. 5, all people have a say. 6, work for a peaceful world. 7, the web of life's the way. And that brings us back to me and you. 1, each person is important. 2, be kind in all you do. 3's over here. 3, we help each other learn. 4, and search for what is true. 5, all people have a say. 6, work for a peaceful world. Decide. 7, the web of life's the way. And that brings us back to me and... Now just the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that brings us back to me and you. Yes! So take those to the voting booth. And now we have to become serious, right? Enough playfulness. This is the time in our service where we do settle in a bit more, where we take moments in silence to be more fully present to our bodies, to our minds, to our spirits, and to the world in which we are embedded. So I invite you now to take a few moments to turn in silence towards that which you find most holy, for prayer, for meditation, and for reflection. Most holy and beloved Spirit of life, thank you that we have awakened again today, that we are able to breathe and be here now, that we might be in this eternal now, where past and present and future all reside, vibrant and rich and alive. This moment already so full, some of us weighed with joys and sorrows, with worries and frustrations, with beauty and wonder. This now contains the past we carry with us, the futures we long to live into, and all of the present. Help us to learn to listen to ourselves, and to listen to the world around us, perhaps most especially to those who challenge us and to those with whom we disagree. Help us to listen and call us to principled living. Through and also regardless of election. knowing all of the violence in the world and the threats that there are, as well as the beauty and the wonder and the possibility. Regardless of roiling anxieties, help us to listen and show us the ways for healing and for hope, for building the world community with each breath, with each deed. Help us to say yes to the present moment and all that it asks of us. Help us to claim and to be claimed by the future that we dream of, not the one that we dread. Help us to give life to the life we most desire, to the world we most need and want and cherish, here and now. May past and present and future be one, as we would be one. Shalom, salam, amen, and blessed be.
It's hard to believe the elections are almost here. Like, the primaries were only like 10 years ago. So at last, it's upon us. I feel like a marathon runner. I've done 26 miles, and all that's left now is the point two. Wondering what can go wrong now in the point two. Probably plenty. I'd like to share reading this morning by David Brooks, who most people have a love-hate relationship with. He's tough to figure out, but he is fundamentally a conservative who tries to be balanced. And so I want to share this reading by David Brooks, which really, I think, confirms everything that we have kind of discerned about the candidates. He talks about Trump, da-da-da-da, and he talks about Hillary, da-da-da-da. But what's interesting, I think, is the conclusion that he draws. I think that's really the spark of the conversation, the kernel of what this is really all about. And I'd be interested to know from you, maybe later on during coffee, if you agree with his conclusion. This presidential election is a contest between the oldest of the baby boomers. Yet Donald Trump, 70, and Hillary Clinton, 69, represent two very different decades in the formation of that generation. Donald Trump became famous as a classic 1980s type, while Hillary Clinton first attained public notice as a classic 1960s type. It's interesting and sad to see how the promise of those two decades has aged. Trump opened Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in November 1983. Go capitalism had a lot of elan back then. Capitalism had washed away the stagnation of the 1970s. It was defeating the Soviet Union. During the Reagan years, writers celebrated capitalism not only as a wealth-generating engine, but also as a moral system, a way to arouse hard work, creativity, and trust. Of course, Trump was always a scuzzy version of the capitalist type. Trump represents capitalism degraded to pure selfishness. He treats other people like objects and lies with abandon. Proud to be paying no taxes while others foot the bill. Proud to have profited off the housing bust that caused so much suffering. He lacks even the barest conception of civic life and his responsibilities to it. His ethos is, get what I can for myself and everyone else can take care of themselves. Trump's policies, sure as they are, usually come down to America breaking its promises. Trump would have America break its promises to its NATO allies, Japan, its creditors, its trading partners, and its own Constitution. Trump reminds us, even those of us who champion capitalism, how corrosive capitalism can be when unaccompanied by a counterbalancing ethos of moral restraint. Clinton gave her Wellesley commencement speech in the spring of 1969. It was filled with that 60s style of lofty, inspiring, and self-important idealism. You know, she said things in that speech like, the challenge now is to practice politics as though the art of making what appears to be impossible, possible, she said. We're not interested in social reconstruction, it's human reconstruction, she continued. We're searching for more immediate, ecstatic, and penetrating modes of living. She dreamed of a society in which trust would be restored, where you don't manipulate people, she says, where you're not interested in social engineering for people. The words were grandiose, but at least there was a spiritual ambition to them. That poetic, aspirational quality is entirely absent from what has become the Clinton campaign. When asked why she wants to be president or for any positive vision, she devolves into a list of programs. And it's never enough just to list 3 programs in an answer. She has to pile in an arid hodgepodge of 8 or 9. This is pure interest group liberalism, buying votes with federal money, not an inspiring image of the common good. The twin revolutions of the 1960s and the 1980s liberated the individual, first socially and then economically, and weakened the community. More surprising, this boomer versus boomer campaign has decimated idealism. There is no uplift in this race. There is an entire absence in both campaigns of any effort to appeal to the highest angels of our nature. There is an assumption in both campaigns that we are self-seeking creatures rather than also loving, serving, hoping, dreaming, cooperating creatures. There is a presumption in both candidates that the lowest motivations are the most real. Ironically, one of the tasks for those who succeed the baby boomers is to restore idealism. The great challenge of our moment is the crisis of isolation and fragmentation, the need to rebind the fabric of a society that has been torn by selfishness, cynicism, distrust, and autonomy. At some point, there will have to be a new vocabulary and a restored anthropology emphasizing love, friendship, faithfulness, solidarity, and neighborliness that pushes people towards connection rather than distrust. Millennials, I think, want to be active in this rebinding, but inspiration certainly isn't coming from the aging boomers now on stage.
Thank you, Rick. And for those of you with more musical acumen than I, you'll notice that those two numbers in your order of service were switched. So that was the number listed as the response to meditation, just in case you're wondering. Well, each week as we gather, we have many opportunities to connect with this community and with the living tradition that it draws from. As Tom began our service today, a reminder that justice calls to us and invites us to pick up the instruments for which we are best equipped and to play along with our own version of that music. There are many opportunities to do so listed in your bulletin. Lots of things going on in this community. Every week there's always an opportunity to participate in the mission and vision of this place. A couple I'll bring to your attention. First of all, 2 opportunities to participate in contributing to the life of our sister congregation, San Esteban. First of all, there is a collection, an annual Thanksgiving collection that is beginning the next 3 Sundays, an opportunity for us to contribute financially to that congregation to help our sister congregation there on the west side. If you'll stop by the congregation life table, you can pay with cash or check, or you can use a credit card or debit card there. There's also going to be a continuation of the giving tree to benefit San Esteban, and Julie Miller, our Director of Religious Education, is looking for folks to help execute and plan that giving tree process. So if you have any extra energy to do that, stop by the Religious Education table after service in Elliott Hall. Also, another justice opportunity coming up. There is a fundraising concert a week from Monday on the 14th of November, 7:30 p.m. here. A delightful fundraiser for First Church's outreach, working with the Homeless Youth Resource Center. Keith Trickett, who's a fabulous baritone and good friend of David Owens, will perform nonsense compositions, including works by Noel Coward and Gilbert and Sullivan. So if you're interested in participating in that, taking in some good music and participating in a free will offering to raise money to feed homeless youth in this community, I hope you'll put that on your calendar. And finally, just a reminder that those of you who are new or newish to this community, you're invited to join me in an information session in the little chapel right after service. I'll be down right here by the piano, and we'll head over there for a brief coffee hour, snacks, and an opportunity for you to get to know other newcomers and ask questions about this community. That and so much more I hope you'll avail yourselves of. Please now take a moment as our ushers come forward to receive this morning's offering to introduce yourself to those around you and greet them warmly.
We may all be of a single mind when reflecting on the current election campaign, concluding that it is the most surreal, despicable, uncivil, and meaningless campaign in history. The smut alone forces us to reckon with new lows in a campaign. Who could have imagined the foul language and disrespect accorded to candidates running for the highest office of the land? This has been a spectacle played out on the world stage, I believe, bringing shame to our nation. And through it all, what has felt like an eternity, scandal after scandal, slugfests, erroneously called debates. This election year will have to be rated R. Teachers had to do a soft shoe in their civics class, studying how the American political system had been reduced to the language of groping women's genitals, the size of a candidate's penis, a moderator's menstrual blood, and the female Democratic candidate being schlonged by a black man in the 2008 election. And I'm just skimming the surface. And for some perverse reason, the extra pounds put on by a Miss Universe beauty queen has outweighed any concern about climate change, homelessness, education. Well, I surely thank God that I'm not a civics teacher in 2016. But I believe that all of us have been bigly embarrassed by this election. It has pulled our nation down to new lows of profanity and personal insults, completely ignoring the biggest issues of our lifetime. Instead, we now face a real specter of fear that casts a frightening shadow over the whole democratic process. Now, I'm not sure, and I don't think anybody really knows how to begin picking up the pieces of a shattered democratic system beginning November 9th. A different America will stand before us regardless who wins. A country severed by impassioned ideologies that defy any kind of reconciliation, let alone a modicum of compatibility. The threat of violence in lieu of dialogue compounds the uncertainty of the days and years that lie ahead, filling us with dread about a most fragile future. But still, we are not the first generation facing an untenable political landscape. Now, I don't necessarily find much comfort in that, other than that I believe that there are possibly some helpful lessons to be gleaned from the past. At least it may provide for us a roadmap of that which ought to be central in our thinking today. I am personally drawn to one of the greats of our tradition, Ralph Waldo Emerson, not only because of his eloquence, but because he never intended to get politically involved. Unlike his fellow transcendentalists such as Henry David Thoreau and his advocacy of civil disobedience, or Theodore Parker, who practiced guerrilla warfare with John Brown at Harper's Ferry, Emerson was just your average Unitarian intellectual who waxed eloquently about the spiritual life. But the agonizing issues in his day, which witnessed an America torn apart by impassioned ideologies, culminating in devastating violence in our nation's Civil War, forced Emerson to turn to political commentary despite his preference to sidestep it completely. In his essays, Emerson increasingly understands the moral necessity of speaking directly to the issues. But more importantly, he underscores what we feel paramount in any political discussion. He regards politics as a practical application of ethics and moral philosophy. We need to look at it this way. Politics is a practical application of ethics and moral philosophy. And Emerson even goes to the extent of declaring that all political questions are at bottom moral questions. Emerson didn't come up with this position in a vacuum. In fact, it reflects the very basic elements of liberal theology. Where Calvinism was wreaking havoc with its orthodoxy of original sin and innate human depravity, the liberals of a generation even before Emerson, developed an ethical theory arguing that it was moral sentiment, not depravity, moral sentiment that was innate in human nature. So in contrast to the austere view that only a select few would escape the dire consequences of human depravity, liberals posed the proposition that all human beings had the capacity for good. Men and women, liberals argued, had the capacity for ethical judgments, and men and women could make decisions and take actions of their own. So this liberal foundation provided a building block for Emerson to where he could legitimately embrace the idea that human beings operated in terms that were moral in nature. The caveat, however, was that the moral nature of humanity did not guarantee moral action. Ultimately, it was all a matter of human choice. Human choice determining the kind of world in which we live. The innate moral sense which lies at the heart of what it means to be human is merely an enabling power, something that has the potential to do good. Now, to paraphrase Emerson just a little bit, he would argue that moral action was not hardwired into the brain. Morality simply constituted a mechanism by which individuals could understand the implications of their actions and recognize the potential for improving situations that caused hardship or disparity or injustice. The language of that time, 1830s, 1840s, used phrases like cultivating moral development would increase our likeness to God. So cultivating our moral development would increase our likeness to God. One of Emerson's main themes, expressed so eloquently in his writings, was primarily an urging for us to advance ethically. And in our moral development, we move then closer to the likeness of God. But ultimately, it's a matter of choice. We can take it or leave it. Morality is just a potential that is found in human nature. We can choose to cultivate that and grow, or not. Isn't this a fascinating way to look at politics? Choices need to be made. And so, what do we choose? Do we pursue a course of self-interest, or do we increase our likeness to God? Now, doesn't every election really come down to this? The ballot, as such, presents us with moral options. Political questions are moral questions. Political choices are moral choices. Now, whether or not we choose to act morally often depends on how we perceive and interpret actual events taking place in our lifetime. In Emerson's time, the defining event, of course, was slavery. Now, listen to Emerson's passage on the condition of slavery, keeping in mind that all of us as human beings, have choices. Choices, for example, in how we respond to moral injustice. This is how Emerson depicted the scene of slavery. I am heartsick when I read how slaves came here and how they are kept here. The whip applied to old men, to tender women, and undeniably, though I shrink to say so, pregnant women set in the treadmill for refusing to work, when not they but the eternal law of animal nature refuses to work. Men's backs flayed with cowhides, and hot rum poured on, superinduced with brine or pickles, rubbed in with a corn husk to the scorching heat of the sun. The runaways hunted with bloodhounds into swamps and hills, and in cases of passion, a planter throwing his Negro into a copper of boiling cane juice. Now, this is one context which impels Emerson to declare that politics is a form of ethics. We have choices to make. And Emerson pushes hard on this point in declaring that we simply cannot assume the triumph of good. We must become an agent for good. There exists an inherent moral sense that must be embodied. Slavery sets itself in opposition to the moral order of the universe. This election, 2016, calls upon moral choices that include race, homophobia, women's rights, immigrant populations. Do we fully understand the implications of our choices? The challenge of a principled life, said Emerson, is to remember the sacred duty of judging for ourselves instead of following the custom of society. There seems, therefore, no precept so important as that man should get his principles nowhere but in himself. There is no other way to arrive at the voice of God but by patient listening to your own conscience. The question of what will your conscience actually allow? What about your conscience? Well, this is what permeates the present day election and forces us who are grounded in liberal theology to shake our heads in disbelief and ask those who favor violence, are you deaf to the voice of God? Does not the moral sense that rests deep in your human soul arouse you sufficiently to end the subjugation of all who are not born white, male, able-bodied? In 1831, Emerson, as minister of the Second Unitarian Church in Boston, preached a sermon against the unjust treatment of Native Americans. In his condemnation of our nation's position vis-a-vis Native Americans, he termed it as a barefaced trespass of power upon weakness. Barefaced trespass of power upon weakness. And it seems to me that Emerson's metric for measuring the moral implications of an action is whether or not it reflected the shameless intrusion of power over weakness. We witness evidence of such violations today with threats to deport millions of immigrants, militarizing the police in black neighborhoods, reducing women to mere physical objects, intimidating Muslim Americans. And Emerson lamented back then the alarming symptom of how obtuse is the moral sense of the people. He was mystified as much as we are. In 1838, Emerson wrote a public letter of protest to President Martin Van Buren against the forced removal of the Cherokee Nation from Georgia to Oklahoma, the infamous policy that eventuated in the Trail of Tears, in which some 4,000 people died. The drama playing out at Standing Rock today reveals the same moral bankruptcy unleashed by white power. Native American activists today sing and pray in protest to stop an oil pipeline moving closer to a river crossing that threatens water supplies and violates their rights to sacred land. Tribe members are standing up to years of racism and torn up treaties. Law enforcement enters the sacred land with pepper spray, rubber bullets, while making hundreds of arrests. The trespass of power upon weakness. As far as I know, about 20 Unitarian Universalist ministers have responded to the UUA president's request to join the Native American protest. And the rationale goes back to the very seeds of liberal religion, liberal theology, which insists that we have the capacity for ethical judgment. Acting morally is a choice. Let me reiterate, acting morally is a choice. In acting morally, we may not satisfy personal wants and gains, but we do move closer to the likeness of God. 1839, while delivering his essay called Protest, which was actually part of an Emersonian series of lectures called Human Life, he connected political dissent to a larger theory of the complete development of the human character. What Emerson so brilliantly laid out for everyone to comprehend is the necessity to, one, question political policy, and then, two, invite all, urge everyone to political engagement as a central expression of the moral life. Who did Emerson target as his audience? Well, it's very clear on this. It would be the equivalent of today's millennial population. He sensed a major political reorientation, his words, a reorientation that was underway in America. And he wanted to reach out to what he termed a new generation of young men and women who were confronting a social world that had settled into a pattern of hardened injustice. So the antidote to this hardened injustice is the new generation coming along. And in that essay, which is called Protest, Emerson describes the recurrent alienation between idealistic youth and unjust society, finding in this conflict the source of continuing hope for human social progress. And today, our hope continues to be intrinsically tied to the idealism of youth for the same reason as given by Emerson. The youth are not yet, his words, blinded by the narcotics of wealth and power. Idealism is understood as preserving moral influence over the direction of public policy. The hope is that the younger generation will maintain their philosophy, thereby ensuring a lasting connection between ethical principles and public policy. Emerson emerged as a philosopher of history, and it is in this capacity that he is most helpful to us today. He makes us aware that political polarity has and always will be with us. The polarity that we're experiencing today is nothing new. And it cannot be stated more eloquently. The two omnipresent parties of history, the party of the past and the party of the future, divide society today as of old. He wrote that 160 years ago. Make America great again, the party of the past. We are better together, the party of the future. Past and future, those two parties have always been a part of our American political landscape. Doesn't it just take your breath away? Along with his historical perspective on social reform, he wrote, "The history of reform is always identical. It's the comparison of the idea with the fact. The idea is the hope of the future. The fact is the inertia of the past." He wrote this in his essay called The Conservative. I think we need to pull that essay out, blow the dust off it. It's vital. The reason we in the Unitarian Church sitting in these pews that are really an extension of our history. The reason we feel so weary and afraid today, just 48 hours before this presidential election, is because it is as though we can hear Emerson say ever so succinctly, civilization depends on morality. Civilization depends on morality. And so we today regard the building of fences and the rejection of refugees and the reinforcement of law and order not in political terms, but we see this as a moral test. The moral is framed by our purposes and principles, that every life is valuable and worthy of respect and must be given every opportunity to flourish. Now, Emerson wrote countless essays addressing not only the emancipation of slaves, but also women's rights. He wrote about the support of immigrants, improving our labor laws, and he wrote about prison reform. We struggle with the same issues today. And yet we continue with the hope that it is possible to transform the shape and direction of our political culture if we understand our choices as moral. In just 48 hours, we'll have a clearer picture about where we're headed and the moral choices our country will make. Can we conclude our service turning our hymn books, please, to number 318? As we extinguish the chalice, may we close our service with these brief words by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, "A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. That which dominates our imaginations and thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming." Amen.